Welcome to time tracking laws in the US. US time tracking laws have a set of different regulations that include the Fair Labor Standards Act, Defense Contract Audit Agency requirements, and specific state labor laws, as well as GPS tracking laws. Keeping an accurate record of employee work hours is important to stay compliant with all relevant labor laws and regulations. Asking why? This way, you shield yourself from potential penalties, protect your employees from overworking, and ensure they're paid correctly. Let's start with the Fair Labor Standards Act, a federal law concerning a plethora of things since 1938, such as minimum wage, overtime, and time tracking requirements. Now, according to the FLSA, there are exempt and non-exempt employees. Who are they? Exempt employees are exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act's overtime and minimum wage regulations. They typically work in executive, professional, or administrative positions. Also, employees aren't required to track their time, as exempt employees aren't paid for overtime hours. Moving to non-exempt workers, they must be paid at least the minimum wage for regular hours and 1.5 times the regular rate for any overtime hours worked. The FLSA mandates employees to store timekeeping records of non-exempt employees for at least 2 years. Here's a list of timekeeping records you need to be compliant with according to the FLSA. Time and day of the week when the employee's work week begins, hours worked each day, and total hours worked each work week. It's interesting that the law doesn't actually specify the maximum number of hours someone can work in a week. However, every hour after the 40th hour will be marked as overtime. Now, the big question is which method to use for timekeeping. The FLSA doesn't specify this information, so you have the freedom to choose a method that works best for you. For example, you can use pen and paper and spreadsheets. However, these might not be the best option as they're time-consuming, easy to lose, or damaged, and there's plenty of room for making errors. A much better option is to use time tracking software, as you save time and decrease chances of errors. And you can choose your preferred method of time tracking. For example, Clockify has a time clock for employees to simply clock in and out once they start and finish their workday. Another option is to use Clockify's timesheets. Timesheets are convenient for entering hours manually. You can easily enter the number of hours for a specific project you've been working on. Next, your employees can keep track of hours by starting and stopping a timer when they begin and end their work for a certain task or at the end of the shift. Finally, you can manually enter working hours. This is great if you want to enter hours for the past activities. For example, if you happen to forget to enter the hours worked the previous day, you can insert them manually. Now, where to store all the work hour records? For example, Clockify automatically stores all the data so you can have it conveniently in one place. Our next stop is the compliance with the Defense Contract Audit Agency, or shorter, DCAA. The DCAA is an agency that provides financial and audit advisory services to the Department of Defense and other federal entities. So, do you have a government contract? If so, you need to be compliant with the DCAA's regulations. Let's see what the requirements are that you need to follow. Firstly, you'll need to create a timekeeping policy outlining the DCAA's requirements. This policy should be easily accessible and transparent so all of your employees are aware of it. Then, the agency requires employees to track their work hours in real time. This means that each day they will keep track of how many hours they worked. The next requirement is for the employees to keep a record of unpaid hours, overtime, and paid time off. The DCAA defines unpaid hours as uncompensated overtime. Apart from that, the DCAA requires labor cost data, which you can easily obtain by determining the hourly rate for your employees. Furthermore, employees need to specify which task or project they'll be working on. Also, DCAA requires employees to sign all timesheets. This can be done electronically or manually. And at the end of every work week, employees need to submit their timesheet to their supervisors for approval. Once approved, no further changes should be made to the timesheets. If you need to make a change to an already approved timesheet, there has to be a record of all changes and an audit trail that shows that this has been changed and when. For example, if an employee stated that they started their shift at 6 a.m. instead of 9 a.m. and later changed it, this change should be recorded. Luckily, Clockify has an audit log feature that allows you to keep track of all the changes. Also, make note that you, as the business owner, need to separate the timekeeping records from payroll records. For example, accountants shouldn't be in charge of the timekeeping sheets to ensure the entire process is completely objective. Additionally, the DCAA requires time reports that show billable hours and costs to be issued once a month, at least. Finally, you have to be prepared for the unexpected DCAA visits performed by the DCAA auditor, also called floor checks. The main goal of these visits is to question employees to check if they understand the timekeeping procedures and also to see if they're working on the assigned tasks and if their time is tracked right. If you've wondered what happens when the employee is late for a few minutes or stays longer at work, stay with us. Let's go back to the FLSA for a moment. This law has a convenient rounding rule, which makes timekeeping more precise. Here's how it works. Let's say your employee started working at 7:05 instead of 7 a.m. sharp. This is when their starting hours should be rounded down to 7 o'clock. But if they start working at 7:08, the starting point will then be considered 7:15. Thanks to this rule, the paycheck will reflect the reality of the employee's hours worked. Next, apart from the FLSA and DCAA's regulation, some states have their own timekeeping laws. These laws mostly differ in the length of time the time tracking records should be kept. So, for example, labor laws in Alaska, Arkansas, Connecticut, District of Columbia, Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, Nevada, New Mexico, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Oregon, Rhode Island, Virginia, and Wisconsin specify the record should be kept for 3 years. On the other hand, in Arizona, California, and Georgia, the record should be kept for 4 years, and in New York, for 6 years. In Utah, for instance, the employer should keep the time record for all employees' absences for 3 years. In Ohio for 5 years, and in Pennsylvania for 7 years. All good? Moving on to GPS tracking. Why GPS tracking, you may wonder? Well, on the one hand, it is a convenient method to track the time of employees who aren't working in the office. When they arrive to the site location, they can clock in and begin with their work. On the other hand, the majority of states mention the legality of GPS tracking, so you should be familiar with those laws as well. Now, most states allow for GPS tracking of employees, but only if you have employees' consent in written or spoken form. However, some states don't have laws about GPS tracking, such as Georgia, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Ohio, and West Virginia. So, if you're using GPS tracking to track employees' time in these states, we strongly suggest you have your employees' written consent. In California, Illinois, Michigan, New Jersey, and Washington, you can use GPS tracking, but only for company-owned vehicles and phones. In the rest of the states, you can track your employees' location if you have their consent both on company-owned and private vehicles and phones. We strongly suggest that you check out the state laws regularly to stay up to date with the newest laws and regulations. All of this information can be overwhelming, and we get it. That's why we've created Clockify, a powerful time tracking software that makes record keeping easier than ever before. Your employees can clock in and out within a few seconds, and you can get all the tracking information in the form of handy reports that you can export in either PDF, CSV, or Excel formats. With Clockify, you'll never be afraid of not complying with time tracking regulations. We've got you covered. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and feel free to share your thoughts and experience with time tracking in the comments below. See you in the next video.